Subscribe if you enjoyed the video. At first glance, Valheim may seem like a pretty simple game, and it can be, but there are some built-in details that take the game a step higher than you may have thought. So here are 7 unique details that you may have missed in the world of Valheim. Detail number 1, creature senses. Creatures in Valheim have 2 main senses they use to locate other enemy creatures and also you, the player. The first sense is vision, a pretty obvious one. And the unique thing here is that some creatures can see further than others, and some even with a wider line of sight, like the Leech, which has 360-degree vision. Now the second sense is one worth noting, because it's not one we've really paid close attention to. At least I haven't, and that's hearing. Ever notice yourself perched up behind some unsuspecting skeletons? If you begin to mine something with your pickaxe, the skeletons will hear you and catch on that there could be some danger nearby. Kinda cool if you ask me. And contrary to popular belief, creatures in Valheim do not have a sense of smell. Therefore, wind direction plays no role when approaching an animal stealthily. Detail number 2, smoke. Probably the most prominent detail in Valheim and one that we all noticed when we first started playing, smoke. Any large heat source from campfires to even hot tubs will emit smoke over time. This feature not only brings in the need for better planned building to output the smoke, but it brings a layer of realism to the game. If smoke is unable to be displaced away from its source, then that structure, for example a campfire, will be unable to breathe and will eventually go out. And speaking of breathe, the same is true for the player. If too much smoke builds up in an area, the player will gain the smoke defect and begin to take damage. Detail number 3, items in water. Staying on the topic of layers for realism, Valheim takes item weight and material properties into account when in the water. You'll notice that dropping items such as metals or serpent scales into the water will see them drop right down to the bottom. Meanwhile, other items such as wood or pine cones will float on the surface, making for a much easier retrieve. For me, it's one of those little details that makes a big difference. Detail number 4, wind direction. Wind direction can be seen via 3 different indicators: the arrow on the bottom left of your map, the wind icon shown when traveling by boat, and visually by looking at the direction of the wind gusts themselves. Much like its indicators, wind has an effect on 3 main components. One being its influence on rain direction, which can be seen visually but also has an impact mechanically, and is why your campfire may be going out during a storm even if you feel it's mostly covered. Number 2 being its need for the operation of windmills. Here you can see a windmill is not functional when the wind speed is low, but as a storm begins to roll in and the wind picks up, so does the windmill. And number 3 being that when you're in a boat, wind will always blow from the direction that you are going towards. Okay, alright, that's not an actual fact, but it sure feels like it. Wind when in boats influences the speed at which you travel depending on the direction the wind blows from. Detail number 5, different foods provide different builds. Unlike most other survival type games, Valheim doesn't require you to eat food in order to stay alive. In fact, you could technically beat the entire game without eating a single piece of food. But that's probably a challenge for another day. Foods in Valheim provide the player with one of 3 different builds. The first type of food focuses on increasing the player's overall stamina upon consumption. Things like berries or muck shakes are examples. Secondly, most meats in the game are used to increase the player's maximum health. Things like cooked serpent meat, sausages, or boar meat are examples. And lastly, there are foods that provide a balance between stamina and health. For example, wolf jerky. The player can eat a combination of whichever food types they desire based on the task at hand. Detail number 6, boat stops when player dismounts. While this can be considered more of a feature rather than a detail, it's one of those things that if it wasn't in the game, would almost be considered a game breaker because of the amount of people that would fall off their boat and be left stranded to die in the middle of the ocean with all their stuff. That'd be me. Detail number 7, tide rises and lowers. Speaking of ocean, the water physics in Valheim are definitely something that can be appreciated. The tide is constantly rising and falling on the shore, and big waves can be formed depending on the weather. These constant changes in the tide can make sailing in shallow waters a pretty treacherous task. But one thing that I noticed recently is that if you leave your character in shallow water on the coast and don't touch a single key, the tide will slowly pull you further and further into the water all on its own. It's a pretty minuscule detail, but I thought it was pretty cool. So there you have it, 7 unique details in Valheim that I think bring another level of appreciation to the game. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like and consider subscribing. Leave a comment letting us know which details stood out the most to you. And with that said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.